Torrens of the National Network of Sector Partners, and I'm your host and moderator for today. Thank you for joining us. We have today 4 exceptional speakers on a really important topic for the sector field. Josh Freely of Public-Private Ventures, Plinio Ayala of Scholas in the Bronx, Earl Buford of WRTP Big Step in Milwaukee, and also of the NNSP Advisory Committee, and Jerry Rubin of JVS in Boston. This is an online meeting in which we hope not only to share information with you, but also to get your guidance on how we can best use the study to help promote sector initiatives. It's a bit of an experiment, our first online member meeting, and after it's over, we hope you'll share your feedback with us. To minimize background noise, phones are muted, and as we call on you, we'll unmute you. If you haven't logged in yet with your audio pin, we'll send you a reminder. If you don't log in, we won't be able to unmute you at all, so we do want your participation and ask that you put in that audio pin. And if you have audio or other technical problems, you can let us know by raising your hand or sending us a question through the questions pane. We're also recording this session, and we'll make this recording available afterwards. So if you want to share it with others in your office or your network, your initiative, you can do that. Just a few logistical notes. You have a control panel, and here are the ways you can get our attention. You can raise your hand by clicking on the button that has a picture of a hand on it, right there. If your hand goes up, we'll call on you at the next break. You can also click that button again to lower your hand if your question gets answered or if you just change your mind. You can also ask questions using the questions pane, and that's right there. So feel free to send us questions as they occur to you, but know that we're going to hold most questions until discussion period after the main presentation. And if we don't get to your question before the end of the webinar, we will email you a response afterwards. We might also respond to questions in the questions pane as we go along, and please feel free to contribute to the dialogue by suggesting resources or other bits of information that might be of interest through that pane. To get this control panel out of your way so you can see the screen, there is a minimize button, and you can click on that and it'll diminish. And then to make it come back, if you need to make a change or enter a question, just click on that again. So I mentioned that this is an online member meeting, and we wanted to try this way of gathering our members for a few reasons. One is that it's been a goal of NNSP to get advice and input from our membership, an ongoing goal. We represent, obviously, hundreds of sector initiatives around the country, and we want to be sure that our plans are consistent with what's needed. We put out a survey to ask people about how they'd like us to use the study that we're going to talk about today, and unfortunately, nobody responded. Well, no, that's not true. We did get one response, a very detailed response, for which we're grateful, but that's not enough to get a good sense of how NNSP members are thinking about this, and we feel the subject is important enough that we wanted to convene around it to get more feedback and input. And as a network, we tend to meet in person just once every 2 years at our national conference. The last one was in Denver in 2007, and this November will be in Washington, D.C. So we just realized that that's not enough to actually meet, and if we can virtually meet, then that may be a way for us to stay connected. Because we are a network, and we want to have the chance to learn from each other, exchange information, even to influence how we are doing our work. As I said, though, this is an experiment, so at the end, we'll really want to get feedback on how it worked, and there will be an evaluation that pops up. We hope that you'll complete that. It'll be very short. So just to get started, since this is a member survey, I'm going to launch a quick poll. We'll do a few of these throughout. And this poll is about your tenure as an NNSP member. How long have you been a member? This gives us a sense of how long you've been part of our network and thinking about what we can do not only as individual initiatives but together. And we'll just take a few minutes to give people a chance to vote, maybe about 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And here's what we've got, which of course I can't see. But it appears that there's a good deal of experience in the middle range, and actually quite a spread amongst our group. So when we looked at the list of people who were planning to participate, we found that it's a very diverse and knowledgeable group, and we're glad to have you on. So just as a framing comment, I've been thinking about why this study seems so important to me. Well, I should say I was thinking about it last night. It comes down to two questions for me. One is, how do I really know what I feel I know about sector initiatives and their effectiveness? And I've had a conviction about the effectiveness of sector initiatives for a long time, but how can I be sure? And so in thinking about this question, for some reason I settled on the analogy of the big fish story. One way that I know what I know about sector initiatives, or we know, I think, is that after years of work in the field, we feel its effectiveness. We know from experience. And if you've ever had a big fish on the end of your fishing line, you know that there's nothing like that. I think we feel the same way, if I can stretch this metaphor beyond its breaking point, about sector initiatives. We see the results every day, and I don't want to diminish the importance of each and every individual outcome from sector initiatives. I think we actually need to do a better job of linking these individual stories to the bigger picture. Neither one sort of stands on its own, but together they're very compelling. That may be a different webinar topic. And I think we in the workforce development field, and particularly the sector initiatives, have gotten good at measuring our successes, even when they're, as in this case of this fish on the ice, relatively small. But we track outcomes over time. We definitely keep track of the impact of what we're doing and are better and better at communicating them. Well, how can we use these kinds of things to make others believe in the effectiveness of sector initiatives? Certainly there is growing belief in the effectiveness of sector initiatives. And yet our own convictions can sometimes be hard to use in persuading others. And getting others to feel the same way that we do can be a challenge with our existing set of tools. Certainly we can tell stories, and we can try to pass on the accumulation of our experience through words. And there are many, many persuasive profiles of sector initiatives. I mean, there are so many sector initiatives out there doing innovative and compelling work that is, in fact, that is a compelling body of evidence. We, of course, also have evidence in the form of other kinds of studies. And certainly there are thousands and thousands of individuals who have gotten good jobs or advanced through the intervention of sector initiatives, hundreds and hundreds of employers that have found the skilled employees they need. There are lots of documentations of these outcomes. And actually, I'll take this moment just to say that if there is a favorite study of yours that has to do with the effectiveness of sector initiatives, please send it to us through the questions pane, and we'll try to make note of those that people find useful. And then I'm sure Josh will pull me back from this assertion, but you know, as Jack Litzenberg put it in the congressional briefing that he and our panelists did, a random assignment study is the gold standard, and in other words, as close to proof as we're likely to get. Having this study really adds another dimension to our ability to persuade others. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so I'm losing track of my metaphor here, but I think this study is either a big fish or has helped us catch one. And I do believe that it's quite important for us. I think it not only validates what we know, and I'll admit that that's still my strongest reaction, but it also helps inform us about what works and what doesn't. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our panelists about why they feel that their initiatives yield the results that they do. Okay, so this is roughly what we'll talk about today. A little bit about the study, about the participating initiatives in the study, what we can learn about the initiatives and the effectiveness of sector initiatives from the study, and then how can we use the study in our efforts to promote sector initiatives. So I'd like to take another quick poll before I turn it over to our panelists. And this poll is just, of those topics, which topic would you find most of interest? With the caveat that we are going to cover all of these topics, but we can spend more or less time in our question and answer period on them. So I'll give you a few minutes. It's certainly possible to select more than one, but if you select them all, we'll do what we were going to do anyway. Okay, I'll give you about 5 seconds more to vote. The polls are closing. We're about to announce the returns. Okay, so just spending a lot of time on the results of the study and the profiled sector initiatives, I think is key for you all, and that's great. I also see that you're very interested in how you, as sector initiatives, plan to use the study yourselves and to share information, and that will require all of you on the line to contribute, you know, your thoughts about the subject, how you either already have or plan to use it. So we'll get to that in a moment, but why don't I turn things over now, probably a bit late, to our presenters. I'm going to let Josh freely take it from here, and hold on a moment while we transition to Josh's leadership. Josh, you're in charge now.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody. It's my real pleasure to be here. I hope that everybody can see my screen and can hear my voice. We are here to really share with you what we think is a really good news story for the workforce development field in general, and in particular for sectoral employment and those who run sectoral employment programs. We embarked on this study, this randomized study, impact study on these 3 sectoral employment programs, employment training programs, in around 2003. And it was after really positive initial results in outcome studies conducted by the Aspen Institute and by PPV. And so with those initial positive and really exciting results, we decided to try a random assignment, as Jack Litzenberg said, the gold standard, in an effort to prove that these programs are effective in improving the lives of their participants. And so this is a study that's long in the making, and just to give you a sense of, the study was of 3 organizations, and we selected these 3 organizations from nominations from around the workforce development field, and we really had just a few criteria. First, they had to serve over 100 clients in a given year, and we needed that because we needed to have for them to be able to recruit enough people to make the study valid. We wanted them to have strong reputations and have been well-established sectoral programs, and we wanted them to try or attempt to be placing people in jobs that averaged above $8 an hour. So we selected the 3 organizations that you'll hear about in just a minute, and then they were asked to recruit double the number of participants that they normally serve. And those participants go through the entire application process, sometimes visiting the sites 2 or 3 times to be interviewed, to do testing. And once they're determined to be eligible, and they have gone through the entire application process, they were then randomized into a control group that received no services and a treatment group, a participant group, that went through their normal program. We did an initial baseline survey to determine what their job histories were like at the time that right before they were randomized. And then after they went through training, we did a follow-up about 24 months later that could occur anytime between 24 months and 30 months after they entered the program. Okay. Rather than having me tell you about the 3 programs, we're really fortunate to have the 3 executive directors of each of the programs who participated with us. And so I'd like to have them just do a brief introduction to their organizations and their programs, and then we'll come back and talk more about the study. So first is Earl Buford, who is the executive director of the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership. Take it away, Earl.
Thank you, Josh, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we're really excited to be here, and we're really excited to take part in this study. I think Jack Litzenberg said it best. I mean, it's the gold standard, and what else do you say to that? So the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership is, as our name details, is located in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin in particular. We're a membership organization that brings together business, organized labor, and workers to identify and meet industry needs. We like to say that we're employer-led and worker-centered. So it's really a way to bring all those factions together in a coordinated fashion from a sector approach. In our model, we really rely on industry data and research to start to analyze and develop where the jobs are. So we start with the jobs first and then work backwards. Generally, we, from a sector basis, research each sector. And for this study, we focused on healthcare, construction, and manufacturing. And in our model, being that it's a flexible one right now, healthcare is not as high in our market, but that's soon to change, especially with the fact that we're now a national fund site, and construction and healthcare are big on, are in the first year of that. So, but at the time of the study, we were focused on healthcare, construction, manufacturing. And generally what happens in our model, we analyze the sectors and develop a needs assessment for each sector. And once the assessments are done, that's usually done every 2 years, we send the industry coordinator, who leads a committee of employers and union representatives, to really start to identify where those needs are and where those jobs are. And from those assessments, we develop, if training classes are needed, we develop the system to connect our regional community residents to jobs and careers in the individual sectors. So, in the terms of this study, we focused on short-term technical training, which were generally 40 to 160 hours, as detailed on the PowerPoint. And all those trainings were developed by the industries we work with. So again, that strong sector focus was involved in the development of those training classes, which also included an essential skills component that's focused on operating and thriving within the industry and the culture and then pathways for those individuals. Technical training was also offered through a range of service providers. We include our member company employees, so again, bringing that employer-led focus here, who also worked as trainers. We also used our tech college system, and where we supplement some of the training. And we also brought in industry experts, whether it was a person who's laid off or retired or on loan. So a lot of different methods were used. Student supports also was integral in this piece, and that was, once we go over the study, you'll find in the findings, you'll see that the retention piece was vital, and that's because of the fact that we were able to really develop a network of wraparound services that allowed the support for our students and our clients, and really their remedial education offered through a network of our partners. So again, a coordinated approach is what we strive for, and that's all leveraged with the combination of public funding, particularly working really closely with the workforce boards. We're fortunate in our region that in the seven county region we have 3 workforce boards. You're probably laughing and saying, well, that can be troublesome at times, but in our case it was actually quite nice because we're able to an individual can come from any part of the region into our programs and access our services, and because of the relationships with those workforce boards, they were able to access and gain the services needed. So it's kind of a quick synopsis of our organization in terms of the study, but really from a worker-centered standpoint, there are 4 ways to access the programs. One is once you come in, there's an individual assessment given, and from there you're either placed into training, and there are 2 types of training. As I mentioned, the technical hands-on training. There's also educational training, particularly for the construction industry and some individual employers. So we also had an educational training component. The third is for individuals who dislocated or come with skills who didn't need full-scale training. We're able to do a direct placement and really focus on those needs I mentioned earlier and connecting those skilled workers to those openings. And the fourth, as I mentioned earlier, is with our network of partners, is the remedial referral system. So that individual who may not have had the skills needed for that particular job at the time can gain those remedial skills and then refer back to our normal channels. So again, our focus is a very coordinated sector-based strategy around working with labor, working with employers, working with community partners to really identify where the skill levels are. And for us, being a part of this study has allowed us to really build support. It shows that our model works. It shows that a coordinated workforce system works. And for us, now that we're in the first year of a national fund grant, that part is growing, and especially capacity investments are starting to come in from our local funders. So it's a really big development for us. It's allowed us to really get our development campaign off the ground, especially on the leverage resource side. So now we're really able to diversify the resources that come in to help our employers and also help our clients from a public-private philanthropic basis. And in terms of a rollout of the study, we're in the process of developing that as we speak. But again, it confirms that our model is working, that coordinated workforce partnerships work, and as we all know, right now it's more important than ever. And once again, it's also something that our state is trying to use from a policy development level. So to finish up, I want to quote Jack Litzenberg again. This is the gold standard, and it's something that we're proud to be a part of, and I think it's going to really help to develop even more strategies around sector-based strategic partnerships. So thank you.
Thank you, Earl. Next we have Jerry Rubin, who's President and CEO of JBS in Boston. Go ahead, Jerry.
Hello, Josh. Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you who are listening in on this session. I want to just first express my appreciation for our having the opportunity to participate in this study. This, of course, is easy for us to say now that we're done and we've seen the results. It was a very challenging undertaking that we and our 3 other organizations went through in putting together and working with PPV on this study. But I think the results really make the effort worthwhile in that just for the first time in a very, very, very long time, there's quite convincing data that workforce development training works, and some of the particular elements that many of us have been stressing, career development, intermediary capacity, sectoral focus, are really key to high-quality programs and results. So, but enough cheerleading. You all will look at the results yourself and hopefully use it. Let me just say a little bit about Jewish Vocational Service, and I'll go just into a very little bit of detail about the organization and our programming, and then answer questions later if people want me to go into any more detail. Our organization is just over 70 years old. We were actually founded at the tail end of the last Depression, so we know many economic ups and downs. We were originally founded as part of a national network of organizations. We were all independent nonprofit organizations, but we're affiliated through the International Association of JVS. And we were founded initially to help largely, at that time, Jewish immigrants coming from Europe to get into the labor market and succeed into careers, move into careers that could support families. Our mission is fairly consistent, has been fairly consistent for that 70 years, but over the years we have dramatically broadened the constituents that we work with, so that now the vast majority of our clients are low income, lower skilled, largely immigrant, not exclusively, but largely immigrant individuals throughout the metropolitan Boston area. We continue to serve the Jewish community as well, particularly in this most recent recession, but our major focus has been workforce development for lower skilled, lower income workers. We are an organization that provides 2 kinds of workforce development services. Pre-employment services, which is the focus of this study, as well as what we call career ladder or incumbent worker services. And I'll talk a little bit about those. Our pre-employment services include basic literacy and adult basic ed and ESOL, math literacy, adult diploma programs, and basic preparation for moving into higher level work skills programs or post-secondary education. We provide a set of occupationally specific training programs. The medical office this was part of the study we'll talk about is one of those, and also a range of placement services, support services during training and education, and post-placement support services. So that's all on the pre-employment side. On the career ladder side, or the incumbent worker side, we deliver a range of basic education, job skills, career coaching, and career advancement, as well as post-secondary preparation services with close to 30 employers in the Boston area. We are a sector-focused organization, as my colleagues are from the 2 other organizations. The particular training program that was the target of this study was in the healthcare arena, but we are currently focused on 3 primary sectors: healthcare, which is the largest industry in the Boston labor market; the hospitality industry, including hotels, as well as food service and restaurant operations; and the retail industry, which is primarily based through a partnership with CVS Pharmacy. We consider ourselves a workforce intermediary, and we develop our relationships with employers in that sectoral work through intermediary work. It's really done in two ways, our employer relationships. We're not a membership organization as WRTP is, as Earl described. We are what we consider a customer-driven organization. We have two kinds of customers, job seekers and employees and employers. And our sectoral relationships are organized primarily through individual one-on-one business relationships with employers, as well as group relationships on a sectoral basis. And the group relationships are established mostly through employer advisory committees. We have an employer advisory committee in both the healthcare arena as well as the hospitality arena, involving in healthcare almost every major hospital and many long-term care providers. In the hospitality industry, a number of major hotels and restaurant chains and food service providers. And then in retail, it's, as I mentioned, it's a one industry sector focus. So we have a very close relationship with CVS because their regional training facility was built in our building. That set of relationships with employers is an important part of our intermediary business. Just to highlight, you see the details on the slide, but the highlight of the program were really two specialized training programs, one in medical office, which we continue to run to this day and have built it out in a number of different iterations, and an accounting office program, which we no longer operate. As you can see, that these are relatively long training programs, almost 25 weeks. The length has moved up and down over the years as we've adjusted to the industry need, and also the length of internships, which is a key component of our program. We have continued to, originally these were voluntary internships. They're now required internships. The internships have been a key part of the success of our program, developing both opportunities for employment as well as, for many people, a very good reference, in some cases for the first time in the medical field. We provide a wide set of soft skills training in addition to the medical training, medical terminology, anatomy, physiology, basics, and a lot of focus on soft skills, lots of focus on soft skills. We also do placement and post-placement support, as well as case management services, both throughout the training program and following placement. One item that I think that's mentioned on the slide that I just want to point out is that, and I mentioned earlier, we have a very high preponderance of non-native English speakers in our labor force. It's actually approaching almost a third of the Boston labor force. And so obviously we have quite a number of individuals coming to our training programs who are not native English speakers. So we have integrated ESOL training into almost nearly all of our skills training programs and have strong links between ESOL programs and training programs. The last thing I wanted to mention was that in addition to the pre-employment training, we do have career ladder opportunities with employers that we place individuals in from our medical office program. A particular example I like to use is we honored a woman this year at our annual gala who is a Colombian immigrant, a mother of two, who was actually working in the food industry in a deli for about 7 years. She entered our medical office program, graduated in the top of her class, was placed at East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, which is the largest neighborhood health center in the country. We work on site at the neighborhood health center. She is now getting from us career and academic coaching. She entered a pre-college ESOL class. She's now in pre-college preparation classes and is preparing to enter classes with Bunker Hill Community College that are delivered on site at the neighborhood health center. So that's really the model that we have moved towards, which blends the pre-employment and placement with incumbent worker training and career advancement. I think I've probably gone over my time. We can talk a little bit later about how we have used the study. All I would say there is it's been tremendously helpful for us, and we continue to distribute it and use it to promote the success of workforce development in our work in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And finally, we have Plinio Ayala, who is the President and CEO of Scholas in New York.
Thank you, Josh, and good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're calling from. This is a very exciting opportunity for us. Being here today as part of this webinar is truly an honor, so I thank all of you for allowing me to be part of it. Scholas is a little bit different than our friends at WRTP and at JVS. We are a not-for-profit social venture where about 40% of our revenue is earned revenue through either the computers that we sell and get back into the community or recycling services that we provide the corporations in New York City, and I'll go into that in more depth in just a minute. Our training program was designed about 10 years ago, and obviously at the time we didn't know we were using a sector-based approach, but we were working with companies in the New York City area that had come to us saying that there was a dearth of technically savvy individuals that can fix their computers. And so we launched our A+ training program, which is now a 15-week, 500-hour computer technician training program in conjunction with the businesses in the area, and designed the curriculum based on their input and created what we thought was a pretty exciting program, taking individuals from the local community and putting them through this training program and ending up with very good results, with strong placement and strong follow-up and retention results. Our program provides an array of support services, as does WRTP and JVS. We provide mentoring and coaching to many of our participants. There's a lot of vocational counseling that takes place throughout the 15-week experience and certainly after the conclusion of the training program. Life skills training is a critical part of our program, and it is approximately 20% of the training itself. We do provide job placement, and our follow-up is up to 2 years after the conclusion of placement. The funding for the training program has been primarily through foundation and corporate support. We are beginning to see some government revenue, something that we had intentionally shied away from in previous years, but now recognize that in order to scale, we need to have a nice mixture of both private and public money. And in fact, the demand for our training program has skyrocketed over the last 6 months to a year. And in fact, we're seeing twice as many people that we can serve at this point. The social venture aspect of the organization allows us to create internships for our students. So we connect about 10,000 low-income individuals to computers every year. And in fact, since the inception of the organization, we've connected a little over 80,000. We have a 40,000 square foot warehouse where we go out to corporate America, take all of their electronic waste, and try to salvage whatever we can to get back out into the community. Most of those systems are actually donated back into the community, but some we sell, and that revenue is used to inject resources back into our program. We also charge corporations to take their end-of-life equipment. So we send trucks, we do all of the pickups, arrange all of the reporting material back to the corporation, letting them know what we've picked up and how the equipment is being processed. But for that, we charge a nominal fee, and again, that revenue is used to support the program. But that operation itself creates an opportunity for many of our graduates to be hired as interns after the completion of the training if they haven't secured full-time work when the program is completed. So it allows us to keep a track of the students, it keeps them engaged with the training program, and it has been an integral component of our program since the inception. Our participation in the study has been amazing throughout the program, the study program. We've learned a great deal about scalability, about infrastructure development. I'll talk a little bit more about later on, hopefully in this webinar. But overall, it's been a wonderful experience to be part of it, and the validation of this report has allowed us to get into meetings with individuals, corporations, foundations, and even government officials that prior we were not able to do. So thank you very much again. I look forward to speaking later on in this presentation.
Thank you very much, Plinio. And I want to emphasize before we move forward that it's really hard to put into words the amount of risk that each of these programs took on in entering into this study 6 years ago. No one really knew how this was going to come out, and certainly other rigorous evaluations of workforce development have had at least a spotty history. And so for these organizations to sort of put themselves out there and take the risk of being evaluated with a random assignment study, I'm beyond thrilled that the results are good for them and that they're able to use that. But I think we don't want to lose sight of how grateful we are for taking that risk and how that will really help the field in general. So thank you all to that. As you heard, what we have in the study are three very different programs. We have a partnership organization, we have a nonprofit community-based organization, and we have a nonprofit social venture. So really, all three are doing very different, are very different types of organizations, and they do different types of trainings in different sectors. And so one of our tasks, I think, with this study is to identify the common elements among them that may be contributing to what we're seeing in the results, which I'll be showing in just a minute. All three really had a sector focus. They were all strategies designed to engage an industry or a small set of industries and determine what their needs were in terms of their workforce needs and their training needs. All have a concern for their candidate's career match. In other words, they have recruitment, screening, and intake processes that are really designed to identify if this individual is going to be a good match in this particular career. So they're really concerned about finding the right people for their jobs. The training that they provide is integrated. It's not just technical skills, but also basic skills if they need it, job readiness, the sort of supportive training that they might need, not just to learn how to take a computer apart, but also if they need math or reading skills. That's all integrated into the training. Each of these programs had individualized services that were really geared towards supporting the participant, not just while they're in training, but also while they're out looking for a job and trying to remain on the job. So each of them provided supportive services that were really aimed at helping individuals get over their barriers to employment. And finally, and in some ways, most importantly, all of them were very flexible and were able to adjust relatively quickly to a changing environment. Their close connection to the industries that they worked with allowed them to adjust their training programs to account for shifts in the labor market or in the needs of those industries. For instance, the A+ certification has changed over time, and so Scholas was able to change its training to really encompass those new elements to the A+ certification. WRTP was in construction, and the construction industry began to struggle in Milwaukee, and so they added the hazardous materials. It's the same with JBS. They were able to, as you heard, sort of switch the focus away from, say, accounting into more healthcare, where they felt the jobs were really shifting. So this flexibility and that connection to the industry we felt was really important. So let's get to the study. And what I want to say is that we finished the follow-up to the study in November of 2008, which is when we received the data. We decided, after looking at the initial findings, that we wanted to get these findings out as quickly as possible. So what I'll be presenting to you today are the initial impact findings and some additional results that we ran some analyses on that were in part of our in-brief that we released called Job Training That Works. Those findings will be included in a much larger report where we do a much more detailed analysis, a site-by-site analysis, a subgroup analysis, and look at the impacts in a much more detailed way. And that will be coming out sometime in the winter. So what I'll be presenting here are really the initial impacts that we find so exciting. The study participants, and this includes treatments and controls, were about 81% African American or Latino, about half and half male, although that differed from site to site. JBS served primarily women. Per Scholas served primarily men. WRTP was split more 50-50. About a little over a quarter of the participants in the study were what we would consider to be youth, age 18 to 24. The rest were really in the 25 to 54 age range. About almost 40% had ever been on welfare, and about a quarter were on welfare at the time that they entered the project. About 53% had a high school diploma. Another 22% had a high school equivalency or GED, and just under 1/5 had more than a high school diploma. On average, participants in the study worked about 7 months in the year prior to entering the program, and in that year, participants earned about $9,500 on average. So for our analysis, we had 1,014 respondents to the follow-up study. That represented about an 80% to 79% response rate, which we were very satisfied with. We used regression analysis on all outcomes, controlling for baseline characteristics to determine the impact of the training provided at these 3 programs on the earnings and employment prospects of their program participants. And we asked in the follow-up survey, we asked participants to give a detailed account of all of their activities over the 24 months. So for every month, we asked what jobs they were working, how much they earned, and this allowed us to look at their activities in several different ways. We can look at the earnings and employment of all respondents over the entire 24-month follow-up period. We can look at them in just the second year. That 24-month follow-up period includes the time that treatments were spent in training. In some cases, that opportunity cost, that time when they've removed themselves from the labor market and have opted to train, can be as long as you heard of as almost 6 months. And therefore, we're able to account for that training period by just looking at the second year. So from month 13 of the follow-up period through month 24. But you'll also see that we can look at every month, and so we can actually look at the timing of when the impact of these programs really hit. And so you'll see that when we get to the findings. So let's get to those findings. The first thing we wanted to look at were earnings, and this is earnings from employment. So we asked treatments and controls what jobs they worked, how much they made in those jobs, how many hours, and we were able to come up with their total earnings over the entire 24-month period since they entered these programs. Program participants earned about, saw significant earnings gains of about $4,500 over treatments, over controls over the entire 2-year period. So over that 2-year period, program participants earned about $27,000, and controls earned about just under $23,000. The earnings gains that we saw were particularly strong in that second year. So from when we removed the opportunity cost of training, in that second year from months 13 to 24, there was an earnings gain for program participants over controls of about $4,000. That represents a 30% increase in earnings over controls. So program participants earned about 30% more than controls, earning about $17,500 in year 2 versus about $13,500 for controls. And as you'll see in the next slide, the impacts really began around the 8th month and continued throughout the follow-up period. In this graph, the lighter line are our controls. The darker, almost purplish line are our treatments. And what you'll see is that starting from month 1 of the follow-up period, so this is the period when they've just entered the program, controls earn more, or have higher monthly earnings than the treatment group. In fact, in months 3 and 4, this green area suggests that these are significantly higher earnings in months 3 and 4. However, by about month 6 or 7, as the training period ends and as treatments are now going into the labor market, what you see is that the line for treatments to cross over and now is above the control line. And so for each of these months that are shaded green, treatments earn significantly more in that particular month than controls. So by month 11, treatments are earning just over $1,300 on average versus just under $1,100 for the control group. As we see that by about the middle of the second year, month 18, month 16, or 17, treatments have leveled off around $1,500 per month in earnings, total earnings, versus just under between $1,100 and $1,200 per month for the control group. So as you can see that starting again around month 8 and continuing through month 24, our program participants are earning significantly higher earnings in each of those months than their control group, and than the control group participants. In addition to looking at earnings, we also wanted to look at employment. Program participants were more likely to work and were more likely to work more consistently than controls. In the second year, about 53% of the program participants worked all 12 months of the second year versus about 43% of the controls. Over the 24-month follow-up period, program participants worked about a month and a half more than the control group. And by year 2, the probability of employment for program participants leveled off around 70% in any given month versus around 60% for controls. And you'll see this in the next slide. So here, again, our controls are more likely to work early on while treatments are in training. However, by, again, about month 8, after training is over, the treatments have started to work more than the control group and continue to rise until around the beginning of that second year, month 11, month 12, and it levels off to just above 70%. So in any given month in the second year, treatments are about 70%. About 70% of treatments are going to be working. That is compared to between 60 and 65% of controls, and those differences are significant for each month in the follow-up period. So what we found are impacts that we found earnings and employment impacts for program participants. They're more likely to work, and they're more likely to, and they earn higher wages over that, higher earnings over the follow-up period. One question we had, however, was whether or not the earnings differences we saw for program participants were due to the fact that they were simply working more. So is it just that they're more likely to be working and therefore earning more? So we stepped away from the experimental design for a minute to look at just the earnings of those treatments and controls who were employed. And what we wanted to see was if the differences between treatments and controls earnings stood up if we just compared those who were working. And what we saw is that employment alone does not explain the differences in earnings between treatments and controls. Employed program participants earned about $3,300 more than controls in the second year. And as you'll see, where we saw an impact back here when we were looking at both employed and unemployed treatments and controls, when you just compared the employed treatments and controls, the impact was later but still very strong. So that by about the 16th month of the follow-up period, treatments are earning significantly more than controls, leveling off around $2,100 a month and between $2,000 and $2,100 a month versus between $1,800 and $1,900 a month. So even controlling for employment, we see differences in the earnings of program participants over controls. So what might be the explanation for that? Well, earnings are a function of working, of how many hours you're working, and your wages. And so we looked for this group that was employed. We wanted to look at the hours and the wages to see if we could figure out where some of these earnings gains were coming from. What we found was that employed program participants worked about 200 more hours than employed controls during year 2. So they were working it comes out to about 4 hours a week more. So not a huge amount of time more hours, but program participants were working more hours overall. They were also working in jobs that provided them with higher wages. In the most recent job, the job that they had most recently worked since at the time of the end of the follow-up period, program participants earned about 80 cents more per hour in those jobs than controls. They were also significantly more likely to work in jobs that offered benefits, and worked about a month and a half longer than controls in jobs that offered those benefits. This final graph shows wages. And what you see, similar to that graph that we saw with the earnings for those employed treatments earned about, by month 16, just over $12.25 an hour. It peaked around just above $12.50 an hour and was relatively significant for those last 6 to 8 months of the follow-up period, earning about $12.50. That is compared to between $11.50 and $11.75 for controls over that same period. So earning between 80, 90, almost $1 more in any given month towards the end of the follow-up period. So they're working in jobs that provide them with higher wages. So just to summarize our initial impact findings. People who participated in these programs, in these 3 programs, earned significantly higher wages. In the second year, it was an increase in wages of just about 30%. They were more likely to work. They were more likely to work more consistently, and over the entire follow-up period, they worked more months than controls. In the jobs that they worked more hours, and they worked in jobs that provided them with higher wages and were more likely to offer them benefits. And by benefits, we mean tuition reimbursement, paid vacation, paid sick leave, or what was the fourth thing? Tuition reimbursement, paid sick leave, paid vacation, and medical insurance, of course. So because we found these exciting impacts, we have made a few recommendations as we've presented this around the country and to different policymakers and other people who think about these issues. Our first recommendation is to invest in job training. Seems relatively obvious, but as we've seen, there's been a drastic decline in the funding for job training across the sector over the last 25 years. So we really believe that we should be investing in job training that is industry-focused and employer-linked. We recommend that we should create flexible guidelines that enable programs to build on local knowledge and experience. One of the keys that we think we're seeing with these 3 programs is that they're able to adjust what they're doing as the local context changes. As the industries they're working with shift in terms of their demand, they're able to change and shift along with them. We need to be able to create guidelines for these training programs that allow them to do that, to flexibly change while still maintaining their funding and their support. We suggest investing in programs that integrate a range of training and supports. Certainly, the intensive support that these 3 programs provide in connection with the trainings and the skills that they are imparting to their participants are making a difference. And so it is important that we not just invest in job training, but invest in job training that includes these supportive services. As I'm sure Plinio and Jerry and Earl can talk about further, funding needs to be streamlined so that programs who serve these kinds of individuals can really be flexible in terms of how they match people. So let's start funding programs that serve people based on a common career interest as opposed to those who basing funding on particular groups like TANF or disconnected youth. And finally, as we saw with these results, we really think it's time to start measuring outcomes in a longer-term way. That the traditional 3- and 6-month outcomes, if you use them on these programs, you would not see the kinds of impacts we saw if we were looking in a longer time period. And so we really think it's time to revisit how we measure effectiveness and how we measure impacts of programs, think about looking at longer-term outcomes to measure success. With that, I'm going to conclude my remarks and turn it over to Jim for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let me take a moment to transition back to lead role here. There we go. Okay, and I want to thank all of our attendees, you, for staying with us. There was a lot of content just shared, and I know that you have questions that you'd like to ask. We've already gotten some questions, either through the questions pane or by people who have raised their hands, and I would encourage you to think about the questions that you have. Let's start by focusing on the study and the participating initiatives. I'll kick things off, actually, by asking a question, my moderator's prerogative, about particularly just about the initiatives, and this is for Earl, Plinio, and Jerry. I'd like to ask you each to talk about briefly what you feel about your initiatives is responsible for the success. And if you could name one thing, what would that be? Okay, maybe two, but just what the keys to success might be for other sector initiatives and for policymakers to pay attention to. And any of you can start. Earl, if you're there, would you take the lead?
Oh, okay. I was trying to be complimentary. Well, I mean, obviously there's a number of things, but really for us, it's especially since we're a membership company and our membership organization, our labor management approach. I mean, we're able to really analyze the sectors based on what employers are telling us and then what our friends in labor are telling us. So it's really giving us a ground level way to assess where the openings are. And I mean, we kind of call that our spice. And so having that approach is it makes a world of difference.
So deep engagement with the industry, and that's your slice, you say?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Would that be similar for JVS?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Earl on that. Let me add another feature, which I think is really important for us and for all organizations that are successful in this arena, and that is having what I would call intermediary capacity. And when I think about intermediary work and the role of an intermediary, and I think all three of us play that role, it's really playing an organizing role in the labor market, organizing the needs of employers, organizing resources, organizing employees and job seekers, organizing public policy makers. And having that capacity is critically important. It involves capacity to change. Josh mentioned that before. He's mentioned it a couple of times. We are constantly using data and results and relationships with the employers to tweak programming. Capacity to package resources. Josh mentioned the kind of crazy quilt of public and private funding. And I think all three of us have been financial packagers to make these things work. And then as Earl was talking about, the capacity to organize employer partners and be efficient about it. So that capacity is huge, and it takes resources and experience.
Plinio, what would you like to add about what's made per Scholas so successful?
I would echo everything that Jerry and Earl mentioned. Clearly, work and close work with the employer sector has been critical in program design and has led to our success in placement. But I think if I could add one more element, our pedagogical approach is very contextualized. So from day one, individuals are taught in a very hands-on way. They start the first week by building their own computer. The manual is not introduced to the late second week, and that's intentional. Many of our folks learn better that way. And using that approach, I think, has influenced positively our retention rates in the program.
Well, thanks. I'm sure that contextualization is really aided by both your own status as a business and your engagement with the industry. Have you always been a social venture, or did you transition to that?
We always have been. When we first launched the organization, it was with the intent to get refurbished systems out into low-income school communities, and had to retool the operation to become a new computer manufacturer when Windows 95 came out, because the systems we were refurbishing couldn't support that software. And about 7-8 years ago, we had to retweak the model to sort of go back home, where we were again refurbishing end-of-life corporate equipment and getting it back out into the community. But this time our niche was the home of low-income individuals, and that's where we've remained since.
Well, I was struck by the value of that model for an A+ training, because I've seen some A+ trainings come and go struggling with labor market demand, but I guess you have some demand built into your model.
There has been, and if I could add, I think the importance of the internship has been critical here in New York, but what we've learned in our expansion into Miami, that it could also be an externship. So working with the corporate community to have someone work as a volunteer or as a paid intern at a corporation solves that piece of the program for us at a remote location.
Right. Well, we have also some questions pending for you, Josh, but maybe to kick it off, I could ask you, I know that there's ongoing work in analyzing the data that you've collected and preparing a larger report, I guess perhaps for this fall. Could you tell us a little bit about the continuing plans for the study?
Absolutely, and I've actually looked at some of the questions. I'm excited to answer them because I think there's some really great questions here. The analysis is ongoing. As I said, we wanted to get the initial results out as quickly as possible because we think it's a really important time from a policy and from a policy standpoint right now. There's a lot going on with reauthorization, with the stimulus money, and so we thought that getting something out early would be useful. However, there's a lot of information here, and so and I think the fall's a little ambitious. I think we're looking at the winter for a much larger final report, and that'll include an analysis of the services provided by each of the sites, a site-by-site analysis to look at their impacts on a site-by-site basis. We do a subgroup analysis looking at different subgroups, men versus women, different racial and ethnic groups, and how impactful these programs were on those subgroups. We'll be doing some work on what it means to go into different sectors for the treatment members exclusively. You know, were there sectors that were sort of better in terms of providing higher earnings or more stable employment? So we'll be looking at that. And then we'll also be going into, I think, much greater detail in terms of the statistical analysis and what we've done. And in other words, we'll be showing our work a lot more than we can in a smaller report like an in-brief.
Well, you mentioned some of the other kinds of analysis of the data, and I know that one of the questions pending is from a staff member here at the Insight Center, Meiju Lui. I've just unmuted you, Meiju. Do you want to follow up on what Josh just said about the plans to look at the data?
Yeah, no, I think it's good because while the success rate look really great, I was wondering whether there is that breakout by workers of color to see if they end up dropping out more frequently than whites, or their retention rates are lower, or whatever. Just that the unemployment rates are so disproportional for workers of color, and discrimination still exists both at the employer and the union level, especially in some unions like the construction trades, less so in healthcare and other unions. But I would think it would be important for us as we go forward to have that kind of data too, to make sure that we are serving those who most need it.
No, it's a great point, Meiju. And what's exciting about this is that we actually have data that will compare participants in these programs in different subpopulations and subgroups versus controls who did not. And so you really get a sense of what might have happened for these folks had these programs not existed. So we're doing analyses of, again, several different racial and ethnic groups, and again, sometimes it depends on the site. Certain sites serve different groups of people. We also are looking at youth. We're looking at those who are formerly incarcerated. And so we'll be able to, I think, get a real sense of how these programs make a difference for these particular populations versus those who, versus really a sense of what would have happened had these programs not existed.
That's really great. I think that data will be really helpful. And also within the programs, just to compare the rates of success between whites, non-whites, immigrants within the programs themselves, that would be really helpful too.
Great. With that, we will definitely be looking at that for sure. Thank you for the questions. Great question.
Just as a plug, Meiju's project here at the Insights Center, our parent organization, is called Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, and there's information on the Insights Center website, www.insightcced.org. So Meiju did not ask me to do that, by the way. I see there's some additional sort of methodological questions from Navjeet Singh. I'm not sure if I can unmute you, Navjeet. I'm going to try. Well, unfortunately, I can't because your audio pin is not in. So, Josh, did you see Navjeet's questions? And
I do. I can read them if everyone can't see them. Do you have any data on participant retention and the jobs they obtained through these projects? Was one question Navjeet asked. Do you plan to do any cost-benefit analysis? How much was spent per participant to achieve these earnings gains? And what do you know about what the control group engaged in terms of training or other forms of human capital development? Did control folks get to enroll in these or similar programs later than the treatment group? These are all great questions. I'll take them in order. We have lots of data on the retention of program participants in the jobs they got through these programs. So we know every job that they had over the 2-year period, how long they were in that job, whether they got promoted, all sorts of information on the kinds of benefits they get from those jobs. And as part of the final report, we can do, I think, a really interesting analysis of how program participants fared in the jobs that they got versus controls. So that we are absolutely going to be doing an analysis of that. The cost-benefit analysis is an interesting question, and it's one that we've been considering and thinking about. We certainly have been asked the question, in terms of how much these programs cost, and so I think, and Jerry, Plinio, and Earl, if you want to jump in here, to me the question often is, we can certainly find out, and we certainly know how much we spend per participant, and we can also do, I think, a nice analysis of how these earnings compared to what was spent. But to me, given that we are doing this over a relatively short time, 2 years, it's hard to really gauge how the overall impact would be, over a longer period of time versus what we spend in the year of their training, because we only have 2 years. If we make up 80% of the cost of training them after 2 years, we're not actually accounting for the fact that we think that in many cases these earnings are going to grow. And so does that, how do we account for that when thinking about the cost-benefit analysis? Jerry, Earl, or Plinio, do you have anything you want to add about doing a cost-benefit analysis?
I think from a public policy point of view, making the case, it would be worthwhile at least addressing the question, I think all of us do, follow our participants, but long run, you'd probably need to do, I'm guessing you would need to do something relative to Social Security numbers, and some states allow it, some states don't. But if there was a way to do it, even on a short-term basis, I think it would be worth it from, kind of making the case, because I think the numbers are pretty strong.
Yeah, I think that that's probably right. And so we certainly have the ability to do it, and I think that as we presented this around the country, we've gotten that question several times. So I think that in the final report, we will definitely address the cost-benefit issue in some way. Finally, what do you know about the control group? We know a lot about the control group. We asked them about all of their activities. About 30%, in fact, it's a little bit higher than that, received some form of other education or training over the 2-year follow-up period. A somewhat smaller, although still very sizable proportion got another type of skills training over the follow-up period. So we know what training they received. We know if they got certification from that training. We know where they got the training and for how long. So we know a lot about what their activities were. It's a relatively motivated group. This is a group of controls who worked hard to get into these particular programs, and so we weren't, I think, overly surprised that they then went out and found other training. At least a sizable number of them did. But we have all that information, and in our final report, we'll be doing an analysis of those controls who got another kind of training, different training than versus those controls who did not. They were eligible to get training at these particular programs, but only after the 2-year follow-up period was over. So after they completed their follow-up interview, they were welcome to go back and re-engage with JVS, WRTP, or per Scholas. And actually, I'm curious to know if any of them did, but not until the follow-up interview was conducted.
So they're not barred for life?
No, absolutely not.
Well, I want to move on. We have only a little bit more time. There was one other question, which I'll just paraphrase from Susan Crandall at Keystone Research Center, which has to do, I think, with how sturdy the statistical findings are. You can probably interpret this question better than I can. If it's possible to just briefly talk about that, and then we'll move on to how the initiatives are using this in their efforts.
Sure. Briefly, and thank you for the question, Susan. We're actually pretty happy with how sturdy the results are. While we used, in the notations for the in-brief, we used a p-level of 0.10, which is relatively standard in this kind of evaluation research. Most of the findings across the 3 sites, so what we reported, in fact, I'd say I think just about all of the findings were at a p-value below 0.05. As we get into smaller and smaller groups, some of those findings are between 0.05 and 0.10. But the great majority of the findings we were actually pleasantly surprised to find are relatively robust. And we'll show that in a lot more detail in the final report.
And maybe that's something that Susan, if she wants to, could follow up with you directly on, Josh?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to move, and I'm sorry for those questions that are still pending, but I want to move forward a little bit just to ask about, well, I'm going to ask a quick poll. I'm going to skip the poll, actually, and I'm just going to ask for first some comment from our panelists about how you are already using the study, and then from our participants, suggestions for how NNSP could help in your efforts to get the word out there and build support around it. But perhaps maybe, Plinio, we could start with you this time. You could tell us a little bit about how you're using these initial results already and what your plans are.
Sure. I think for per Scholas, we've embarked on a goal to replicate the initiative into 3 cities over the next 3 years. And we, on a hunch, sort of took a chance with a replication site in Miami almost immediately after electing to participate in the study, intuitively feeling that the study results would come back positive. And so what would that mean? And could we then use this study as a way of launching a replication strategy? And we've been able to, by the use of this study, secure meetings with a number of WIB representatives from 3 or 4 cities that we've targeted, and are now using the study to get meetings with local foundation organizations in hopes that they would help fund this. The one arena that I had a sense we'd be asked to be part of, but wasn't sure just how much we'd participate in, is in the whole advocacy piece, is in actually getting the word out that the study can influence policy, could have a profound impact on how WHEEL legislation is written and interpreted going forward. And we've had a number of conversations with local government officials, the local WIB, and are now proceeding to have meetings with state legislators about what the study means. You know, it's pretty ironic when you look at the results of per Scholas under the current WIA legislation. We would not have been viewed as a success. Many of our folks are now placed within 90 days. Many of the earning impacts don't happen till much later. And so how do we influence that or help influence that so some of the legislation gets changed has been something that's been thrust upon us, and actually we're excited about being a part of that.
Well, thank you. Maybe Earl and Jerry next, perhaps. What audiences are you putting this in front of, and how?
We were really fortunate to have PPV come to Boston a few weeks ago. We did a session that was sponsored by SkillWorks, which is our local funders collaborative that's part of the National Fund. And the SkillWorks funder group invited a group of private foundations as well as individuals from our congressional delegation and some other public policy makers. I think we had 25 or 30 people at the briefing. We were interested. Frankly, we had a very specific goal, which was to both let our current funders as well as other potential private funders hear a little bit about both the success of workforce development overall as well as the success of our own particular program. I mean, we actually, the bulk of the resources for our training program, unlike per Scholas and more like WRTP, actually come through various pieces of the public workforce development system, both WIA and through welfare funding, TANF funding. But because of the problematic nature of the way those funds are designated for types of individuals, we actually raised significant private funding as well to fill in the gaps and also to allow us to do the kinds of extensive support service and employer relationship building that we do. So convincing our private partners of the value of their investment is a really important agenda. And then, of course, there's the public policy agenda, which is also important for us as well.
And Earl, you talked about using the study to develop funding and also some policy work in Wisconsin. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what specifically you've done around policy in Wisconsin.
Well, one example, working with our state Department of Labor or Workforce Development Agency to start an initiative, technical assistance advisory with all our statewide workforce boards. So that in and of itself that's kind of almost unheard of.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Technical assistance advisory.
Yeah. Working with individual workforce boards around the state to connect, with their business development offices, but also connecting labor, bringing community around apprenticeships.
So you're providing them consultation about how to build models similar to.
And what's been nice is that this study validated that that is a very effective partnership if coordinated. And I don't think it would have happened without having these findings there to substantiate that. So that's a really huge development in our world. And as a matter of fact, it's also going to allow us to replicate and work with other partners we haven't worked with before. So again, those are really exciting things that, again, would not have happened without this study and without these findings.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What I'm going to do is, first I want to mention that there are some questions I know that we didn't get to, and that we will work to get you responses offline. So my apologies to those who put in questions, but that we didn't have a chance to answer. And thanks to those of you whose questions we did get to air. I think they were very interesting questions. I want to do one poll which fulfills the member input goal of this, albeit in a small way, which I think is appropriate based on our initial survey of interest. If you would just take a moment to tell us what tools from NNSP might be of use to you in disseminating this information. Is there something that NNSP can provide that would help in your process of putting the word out? You see no voting, which means that if you vote, you'll get 100% share. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you all for putting in your. We won't be able to do everything, but we want to be able to provide help to other initiatives who want to piggyback on your success. And I think I'll close the poll at this point. And it seems that some agendas for briefings, a talking points document, and maybe a packet of supplemental information about sector initiatives. And as I mentioned, there are a great number of qualitative studies that really do describe both the characteristics of sector initiatives and the benefits of them that might make a compelling package. So thank you for sharing that. I think at this point, because our time is up, we'll need to close. So I want to thank again our presenters, both for your commitment to this process and for coming and talking with us today. Josh, Plinio, Earl, Jerry, we're lucky to have you on the call, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
NNSP will have another webinar. This is not going to be a member meeting, but in 2 weeks, we'll have a webinar focused on Chicago's sector-based workforce centers. So I will encourage you to join us for that. If you haven't received an invitation and would like to get one, email me. Also, we will have an in-person meeting this fall. I have to mention our national conference, and there is information on our website about it, and registration should be open soon. So once again, thanks to all of you. We appreciate your participation and look forward to talking with you on the next